In 1957, a young soldier named Vincent Gigante walked into the lobby of the Majestic apartment building in Manhattan and shot the most powerful mobster in America in the head. He missed. Frank Costello survived with a graze to his scalp. I think that miss was the best thing that ever happened to Gigante. But then something stranger happened. Gigante started wandering Greenwich Village in a bathrobe and slippers, mumbling to himself and getting committed to psychiatric hospitals 28 times. The FBI watched a man they believed had organic brain damage and an IQ of 70. It was all fake, and he kept it up for 30 years. Manhattan, 1944. A 16-year-old kid from a family of Italian immigrants stepped into the ring for his first professional fight. He lost to Vic Chambers in Union City, New Jersey, but he kept fighting, avenged the loss, and beat Chambers again, including a win at Madison Square Garden in 1945. He had 21 wins across 25 bouts. He was a real fighter. He just found something better in the gym. His boxing manager was Thomas Eboli, a neighbor who happened to be an associate of Vito Genovese. Gigante spent time as a sparring partner for Rocky Castellani and a young Dominic Cirillo, who would later become acting boss of the Genovese family himself. The ring was just the introduction. The real training happened elsewhere. Genovese paid for his mother's surgery when the family could not afford it. From that moment, Gigante belonged to him. By his mid-20s, the former boxer had been arrested 7 times for stolen goods, unlicensed guns, and gambling. He was not a confused young man looking for direction. He was a soldier being shaped. In the Alto Knights, Robert De Niro plays both Frank Costello and Vito Genovese. The film frames them as former friends whose relationship curdled into betrayal. That part is accurate. Both rose through Lucky Luciano's organization in the 1930s. Costello as the political fixer, Genovese as the enforcer. One throne, 2 men who wanted it. By 1957, Genovese decided that Costello had to go, and he sent the kid whose mother he'd paid for. The doorman at the Majestic saw a large man jump out of a car and follow Costello into the lobby around 11 at night. Gigante fired from 6 to 10 feet away, close enough that missing should have been impossible. He shouted something first. "This is for you, Frank." When Costello turned at the sound, the bullet that should have killed him grazed his scalp instead. The unintentional warning saved his life, a miss that changed everything for both of them. A large black limousine with the lights out pulled away from Central Park West. The doorman gave police a description. It led straight to Gigante. At the 1958 trial, Costello testified he couldn't recognize his assailant. The mob code held, Gigante walked free. The law had him in its hands and let him go. I'd say that was the single luckiest break of his life. Once the victim himself refuses to point across the courtroom, the law stops being a threat and turns into a formality. Here's what the film doesn't spend time on. Costello didn't retaliate. He sued for peace, kept his gambling operations in Louisiana and Florida, and retired to his Waldorf Astoria penthouse. An associate still called him the prime minister of the underworld. Bosses and capos came to seek his counsel. He devoted himself to landscaping and competed in local horticulture shows. A man who ran half of organized crime in America spent his final years growing tomatoes. That's either wisdom or surrender, maybe both. Genovese got what he wanted for 2 years. In 1959, both men were convicted on heroin trafficking charges. Genovese died in prison in 1969. Gigante served 5 years and came out with a plan that would define the rest of his life. He started the act in 1969 after being indicted for bribing police in New Jersey. Charges dropped. Doctors found him unfit for trial. Now he knew the formula. One diagnosis could make an entire case disappear. The bathrobe walks through Greenwich Village weren't just walks. He talked to parking meters. He urinated in the street. When FBI agents Pat Marshall and Pat Collins knocked on his mother's apartment with a subpoena, they found him standing in the bathtub under a closed shower head, wearing a bathrobe, holding an open umbrella over his head. That image, a made man with a closed umbrella in an empty shower. It was absurdist theater pitched at an audience of prosecutors. And it worked for 3 decades. The media called him the Oddfather, the enigma in the bathrobe. Internally, FBI agents called him crazy like a fox. They suspected the truth but couldn't prove it. The psychiatric evaluations kept piling up in his favor. Every time prosecutors tried to bring him to trial, another doctor would testify that Vincent Gigante couldn't understand the charges against him. He lived with his mother at 225 Sullivan Street. Across the street sat the Triangle Civic Association at 208 Sullivan, a nondescript club with little more than a bar and an espresso machine. The place was swept for bugs regularly because it was actually the command center for one of the largest criminal enterprises in America. The man shuffling outside in his bathrobe was running an empire from a back room nobody ever photographed. Fat Tony Salerno stood as the public face of the Genovese family, East Harlem kingpin, cigar in his mouth, the man the FBI assumed was running things. The bosses who mattered knew different. When Philip Lombardo stepped down in 1981, Gigante became the actual boss. Salerno was just a buffer, a lightning rod to absorb law enforcement attention while the real power stayed hidden. The man in the bathrobe was running lone, sharking, bookmaking, labor racketeering, and extortion at the Fulton Fish Market and the Javits Center. Every contractor who wanted to work on a major construction project in Manhattan paid tribute to the Genovese family. Every fish that moved through the Fulton Market carried a tax. The operation generated millions, and the man running it was supposedly unable to comprehend basic legal proceedings. The FBI bought the act. Most mobsters knew better. I think the Bureau wanted to buy it. A senile old man in a bathrobe is a tidy file to close. A genius running a fish market empire in plain sight is an embarrassment nobody wanted to sign their name to. Psychiatrists documented 28 hospitalizations for hallucinations. They wrote about dementia rooted in organic brain damage. His reported IQ ranged from 69 to 72. Multiple doctors testified he was incompetent to stand trial. His brother Louis, a Catholic priest, publicly defended him for years. Father Louis gave interviews insisting his brother was genuinely ill. The family had committed to the LIE together. They were all wrong, or all fooled. The distinction stopped mattering after a while. If you want the stories the movies leave out, you know what to do. Because what Gigante did next is the part nobody saw coming. The Gambino family found out how lucid Gigante really was in 1986. John Gotti had just assassinated Paul Castellano outside Sparks Steakhouse without commission approval. Only the bosses had authority to kill a boss. Gotti had broken the oldest rule in the book. Gigante, supposedly too mentally ill to understand legal proceedings, ordered a car bomb. He reached out to Victor Amuso and Anthony Casso of the Lucchese family to carry out the hit. Using another family as cutouts meant the Genovese name stayed clean. On April 13, 1986, Gambino underboss Frank DeCicco was meeting with James Fela. The bomb detonated after a soldier accompanying DeCicco was mistaken for Gotti. DeCicco died. Gotti had canceled his plans that day. The target survived, but the message was clear. A man with an IQ of 70 had orchestrated a sophisticated assassination attempt against a rival boss using the Lucchese family as cutouts. Nobody with organic brain damage plans that. Nobody without clear-headed ambition holds a 30-year grudge against a man who violated mob protocol. I would argue the car bomb proves the act better than any testimony ever could. In 1990, prosecutors indicted Gigante on racketeering charges related to a $142 million window installation scheme. He appeared at the arraignment in pajamas and a bathrobe. The case dragged for years while doctors debated his sanity. The cracks appeared in 1996. Sammy Gravano, the Gambino underboss turned informant, took the stand on July 10, 1997. He testified that he had attended 4 meetings with Gigante, and at every one that CHN was lucid and unmistakably in charge. The defense wanted the jury to believe Gigante was too ill to stand trial, let alone run a family. But Gravano had been in those rooms. He told the court that Gigante spoke lucidly and rationally with other gang leaders. In a thick Brooklyn accent, Gravano told the court that Chin was the boss. Not confused, not incompetent. The boss. First witness to directly detail Gigante's position atop the family. The testimony hit like a bomb. Here was a man who had sat across from the Chin, confirming what the FBI had suspected for decades. Alphonse Darko, former Lucchese acting boss, confirmed it. Gigante had told them directly that his crazy act was a pretense, a tool, a weapon, something to be deployed against law enforcement, while he continued running one of the most powerful criminal organizations in America. The mobsters knew. They had known for years the only people fooled were the psychiatrists, the judges, and the FBI. 3 decades of surveillance, 3 decades of psychiatric evaluations, and it took mobsters flipping to finally break through the performance. And I would argue that is the real indictment here. Not of Gigante, but of everyone who watched him. 30 years of surveillance in psychiatry, and the act only collapsed when the men he worked with decided to talk. Judge Eugene Nickerson ruled Gigante mentally competent to stand trial in March 1996. The performance was finally under review. The trial began in June 1997. Gigante appeared in a wheelchair, wearing rumpled clothes, staring blankly at the proceedings. The performance continued even in the courtroom, but the jury was hearing a different story now. They heard testimony about racketeering conspiracy, about a family he supposedly couldn't manage, about crimes committed while he shuffled through the village in slippers, about millions in extortion payments flowing to a man who supposedly didn't know his own name. On July 25th, they convicted him. 12 years, a $1.25 million finno. The judge said he was finally brought to bay in his declining years after decades of vicious criminal tyranny. But Gigante still wasn't finished. Even from a Texas prison cell, he kept running the family. His son Andrew visited regularly. The meetings looked like ordinary family visits, a son checking on his aging father. But the government was watching. Messages went out, orders came back. Decisions about who lived and who died flowed through Andrew to the captains still running operations on the street. The man who was supposedly too mentally impaired to stand trial was directing a criminal enterprise from behind bars. On January 23, 2002, prosecutors indicted Gigante with several other mobsters, including Andrew, on racketeering and obstruction of justice charges. The accusation was specific. He was still ruling from behind bars, using his son to funnel messages, and he had been faking his mental illness the entire time. The obstruction charge was built on 30 years of deception. Every psychiatric evaluation, every hospital stay, every bathrobe shuffle through the village, all of it calculated. The tapes prosecutors planned to play showed him fully coherent, careful, and intelligent. The man who couldn't understand the charges against him was caught on tape discussing strategy with his lawyers. On April 7, 2003, the day the trial began, Gigante pled guilty. Judge I. Leo Glasser asked him directly, "Did you knowingly mislead doctors between 1990 and 1997? "Yes, Your Honor." 4 words ended 30 years of theater. Prosecutor Rosalind Moskov told the press that Vincent Gigante was a cunning faker, and those of us in law enforcement always knew that this was an act. 3 more years added to his sentence for the obstruction. Andrew got 2 years and a $2.5 million fine. The performance that was supposed to keep him out of prison had now extended his time inside it. The man who shot Frank Costello in 1957 was now 75 years old, serving time in a federal medical facility and finally telling the truth. Not because he wanted to, because the performance no longer protected him. The act that was supposed to keep him out of prison had added 3 more years to his sentence. The greatest performance in organized crime history had become its own punishment. He died on December 19th, 2005, at 5:15 in the morning at the U.S. Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. He was 77. Heart disease finally did what prosecutors could not for 3 decades. The sentence would have ended in 2010. He had 5 more years to serve when his heart gave out. His funeral was held 4 days later at St. Anthony of Padua Church in Greenwich Village, the neighborhood where he had shuffled in bathrobes for 3 decades. The church where locals had watched him mumble to himself on the sidewalk, convinced they were seeing a broken man losing his mind. The service was quiet. No crowds, no spectacle. Most people had stopped caring about Vincent Gigante long before he died. The performance had outlasted its audience. In the Alto Knights, Cosmo Jarvis plays Gigante as a young soldier following orders, a hired gun, doing what he was told. The movie ends before his real story begins. The hitman who missed his target went on to become the most powerful crime boss in America. The young boxer who lost his first fight became a man who never lost at the game that mattered. The man the FBI dismissed as brain damaged ran a criminal empire for 24 years while pretending he could not tie his shoes. When they finally caught him, it was not because the act failed. It was not because the FBI cracked the case. It was because mobsters who had sat across from him told the truth. The performance lasted 30 years. The consequences lasted 5. He died in a prison hospital with no more cards to play. Subscribe for more stories where the movie is just the beginning. I'll see you next week.